Episode 3. Grades, Growth, and the Academic Circus. Lucas, host, welcome back to the 20-something lens. Today we're tackling the glamorous or not-so-glamorous world of academic life. Spoiler, it's less champagne, more instant noodles. Maya, Lucas, you trivialize everything. The academic community is built on centuries of academic research and academic discipline. It's not just ramen and deadlines, it's about how we acquire knowledge and refine cognitive skills. Ethan, exactly. And if you look at the assessment process, the data shows most students hover around an average score. That's not failure, it's statistical reality. But the obsession with academic achievement distorts expectations. Marcus, hold up. From a business perspective, nobody cares if you had an academic success in one academic year. Employers want career opportunity and proof of career development. You can write the best academic writing in an academic journal, but if you can't pitch an idea in a boardroom, you're toast. Chloe, finally, someone said it. The whole academic world acts like academic circles are the only path to validation. But Gen Z knows collaborative TikTok tutorials are basically collaborative learning. And they're free. Lucas, true. I once tried academic study at 2 a.m. with zero background knowledge. Ended up watching cat videos. Still felt like academic work. Maya, Lucas, that's not basic research. That's procrastination. Ethan, actually, it's a causal misclassification. Cat videos don't enhance cognitive development. Marcus, unless you're building a startup called Catademic Skills. Chloe, see? That's the kind of disruptive thinking missing from academic institutions. We don't need another conference on the future of learning. We need memes. Lucas, closing, and that's our cue. Whether you're trying to attend a conference, survive academic performance, or just fake your way through academic career planning, remember, grades fade, but podcast banter is forever. Episode 4. Data versus Drama, the Academic Debate. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is basically an academic debate disguised as a comedy show. Think of it as an academic discourse with more sarcasm and fewer footnotes. Maya, Lucas, don't trivialize. In psychology, we rely on careful analysis and sometimes a classical theory as the basic premise. Without that, you're just telling stories. Ethan, exactly. Stories are anecdotal evidence. What matters is available data and available evidence. With a proper analytical tool, we can apply a method and apply the theory consistently. Marcus, hold on. In business, you don't always have clear evidence. Sometimes you make decisions based on a brief account or a brief overview of market trends. You don't have time for a closer examination every quarter. Chloe, which is why people make a common error assuming a common method works everywhere. That's a basic assumption that collapses when you take a closer look. Lucas, see, this is why I love podcasting. We can briefly describe, briefly discuss, and even give a brief summary of complex stuff without writing a classic work or a classic study. Maya, but that's the danger. A brief description can cast doubt on the depth of academic work. The academic world thrives on carry-out research, not shortcuts. Ethan, and shortcuts fail the accurate assessment test. A closer inspection always reveals flaws in a common assumption. Marcus, fine, but in the corporate world, you need to communicate effectively. Nobody reads a brief review of your academic writing. They want results. Chloe, exactly. So maybe the academic circles should stop pretending memes aren't data. That's my brief discussion for today. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a classic study or just trying to collect information for finals, remember, podcasts are the new conferences. Episode 5. The central question, what counts as knowledge? Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's central theme is simple. What actually counts as knowledge? Spoiler, if it's on TikTok, Chloe says yes. Maya, Lucas, don't oversimplify. In psychology, the central concept is that knowledge must be grounded in theory. You can't just give a brief overview and call it science. We need a clear structure and a central argument. Ethan, exactly. With an analytical approach, we rely on available evidence. A meme might carry information, but without clear indication of validity, it's useless. We need accurate description and careful analysis. Marcus, from a business lens, though, sometimes you just need a clear statement that convinces investors. Nobody cares about a broad definition of market forces, they want a central point and a clear focus. Chloe, which is why I love Gen Z logic. We don't need a classic study to prove that memes work. We just add information in the comments, and boom, alternative explanation achieved. Lucas, or an alternative view, depending on who's trolling. Honestly, podcasts thrive on common usage of ideas. We don't need to be clearly defined like an academic institution. Maya, but that's dangerous. Without closer inspection, you risk mistaking an alternative interpretation for fact. Some things are clearly important, and they must be clearly identified and clearly demonstrated. Ethan, and if it's not clearly evident, then it fails the accurate assessment test. That's the central question. How do we separate truth from noise? Marcus, easy. If it makes money, it's truth. Chloe, or if it makes memes, it's culture. That's the common theme of our generation. Lucas, closing, and that's our brief discussion for today. Whether you're chasing a central focus or just trying to survive finals, remember, knowledge is messy, but podcasts make it entertaining. Episode 6. The Basic Principle of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's central focus is, what makes knowledge stick? Spoiler, if it's a meme, it sticks forever. Maya, Lucas, please. Psychology is not memes. We start with a basic concept, then expand into an abstract concept. The central core of learning is connecting basic components into a basic structure. That's the central tenet of cognitive science. Ethan, exactly. And in computer science, every basic element has a basic function. With careful consideration and careful thought, you can see how a binary system operates on binary opposition zeros and ones. It's clearly important for accurate models. Marcus, from a business perspective, theories must be best described as tools. A basic principle like supply and demand is a classic example. But in practice, markets show a broad spectrum of behaviors, often broadly similar but never identical. Chloe, which is why I laugh at the common theme in lectures. Professors give a broad category of ideas, broadly defined, and expect us to memorize. But Gen Z wants alternative view, not rote learning. Lucas, true. And podcasts let us add information in real time. We can give a brief description, then zoom into the central feature. That's more fun than a textbook. Maya, but don't forget the central importance of theory. Without it, you risk mistaking memes for science. Even if they bear resemblance to valid models, they're not clearly demonstrated. Ethan, and unless it's clearly identified with clear distinction, it's just noise. That's the central point of data analysis. Marcus, fine. But if noise makes money, I'll call it a characteristic feature of capitalism. Chloe, or of class TikTok consciousness. That's my alternative interpretation. Lucas, closing, and that's our brief summary. Whether you're stuck in a classic work or just trying to survive finals, remember, chaos is a central theme of student life. Episode 7. Data, Methods, and the Art of Not Overthinking. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about methods, procedures, and why I never follow them. Honestly, my basic information for finals is, don't panic, just wing it. Maya, Lucas, that's not sustainable. Psychology depends on accurate information and carefully selected samples. If you don't adopt a procedure, you risk bias. The central importance of methodology is to ensure validity. Ethan, exactly. In computer science, we need accurate measurement and appropriate data. Without a carefully controlled environment, you can't trust the output. You can't just rely on available information without context. Marcus, from a business perspective, though, sometimes you need an alternative strategy. If one model fails, you pivot. That's why companies look for an alternative solution or even an alternative source of revenue. It's all about survival. Chloe, which is why Gen Z thrives. We don't just adopt an approach because it's tradition. We look for an alternative means like memes as data. It's an alternative form of communication, but it works. Lucas, see, that's why I love podcasting. We can add information on the fly, give an accurate picture of student life, and still sound smart. It's basically an alternative model of learning. Maya, but don't forget, every beginner process needs structure. Otherwise, you're just improvising. Ethan, and improvisation fails the accurate record test. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. Marcus, unless it makes money, then it definitely exists. Chloe, or if it goes viral. That's our alternative interpretation of success. Lucas, closing, and that's our brief summary. Whether you're chasing accurate information or just trying to survive finals, remember, sometimes the best method is no method at all. Episode 8. Goals, Roles, and Responsibility Roulette. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about responsibility, which is ironic because I rarely assume responsibility for anything except binge watching. Maya, Lucas, that's exactly the problem. In psychology, active involvement is crucial. If you don't become involved in the process, you can't achieve an outcome that's meaningful. Ethan, from a data perspective, the numbers are clear. Teams with active participation consistently achieve objectives faster. It's not magic, it's statistics. Marcus, yeah, but in business, someone has to accept responsibility when things go south. You can't just say, oops, the algorithm failed. Investors want accountability. Chloe, which is why Gen Z hates group projects. There's always one person who refuses to assume the role of leader, and then the rest of us are stuck. Honestly, I'd rather do memes than deal with fake active participants. Lucas, hey, I'm an active role model of procrastination. But seriously, podcasts are teamwork. We're all actively involved, even if Ethan's idea of fun is spreadsheets. Ethan, spreadsheets are fun. And they prove that when you affect the outcome with consistent effort, you can actually achieve a goal without chaos. Marcus, unless the goal is unrealistic, then you need an alternative strategy like lowering expectations. Chloe, or just admitting you never wanted to do it in the first place. That's my alternative view. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're trying to achieve an objective or dodge responsibility, remember, the only guaranteed outcome is that someone will blame me. Episode 9. Problems, Resources, and the Capitalist Circus. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about problems, solutions, and why my biggest additional problem is running out of coffee before finals. Maya, Lucas, that's trivial. In psychology, when you don't address an issue properly, it can adversely affect motivation and even affect the development of healthy coping strategies. Ethan, exactly. And in tech, an adverse effect isn't just emotional, it's measurable. If you deploy advanced technology without testing, you risk an adverse reaction from users. That's why we need appropriate data and available information before launch. Marcus, from a business perspective, every business transaction comes with risk. If you don't allocate resources wisely, you face additional cost. Companies in an advanced economy survive because they find additional support and additional resources when things go wrong. Chloe, yeah, but let's be real. We live in a capitalist society where memes are basically commercial activity. The whole capitalist system thrives on turning problems into profit. That's the capitalist world we're stuck in. Lucas, and podcasts are our alternative solution. We turn stress into content. Honestly, that's the most efficient business sector I've ever seen. Maya, still, the central importance is balance. If you ignore problems, they multiply. If you manage available resources, you can actually achieve an outcome that's sustainable. Ethan, and let's not forget artificial intelligence. It can help us predict adverse effect, but it can also adversely affect privacy. It's a double-edged sword. Marcus, which is why in a capitalist economy, the rule is simple. If it makes money, it's progress, even if it's chaos. Chloe, or even if it's just a viral meme. That's my alternative interpretation of economics. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're dodging additional cost or debating artificial intelligence, remember, in the capitalist world, the only guaranteed profit is stress. Episode 10. Science, Society, and the Climate of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about science, society, and the environment. Basically, everything that makes us panic at 2 a.m. but still scroll TikTok. Maya. In psychology, we study how biological evolution shapes behavior. But in a civil society, those instincts get filtered through norms and rules. It's fascinating how biological science meets sociology. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you can't ignore climatic conditions. They directly affect development of ecosystems. And if you model climate change with advanced technology, you see exponential risk curves. That's not anecdotal, it's math. Marcus, yeah, but in business, atomic energy or any chemical reaction in labs means one thing: profit. Companies in an advanced economy invest in these innovations because they fuel the business sector. It's all about commercial viability. Chloe, which is why Gen Z is skeptical. The capitalist society loves to spin every discovery into a meme or a product. The capitalist system thrives on turning crises like climate change into branding opportunities. Buy eco-friendly hoodies. Save the planet. Lucas, and podcasts are our eco-friendly hoodie. We give an accurate picture of chaos, add some additional information, and call it content. Honestly, that's the most sustainable commercial activity I've ever seen. Maya. But don't forget, the central authority like a central government has to regulate. Without central control, science can be exploited. That's the central importance of governance. Ethan, exactly. If you don't address an issue like emissions, the adverse effect is irreversible. And AI models already predict adverse reaction from ecosystems if we keep ignoring it. Marcus, still, in a capitalist world, the rule is simple: if it sells, it survives. Chloe, or if it goes viral. That's my alternative interpretation of evolution. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're debating biological sex or stressing about climate change, remember, chaos is the only renewable resource we've got. Episode 11. Connections, the science of ties and memes. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about connections. Not Wi-Fi, but human ones. Though honestly, my friendships are basically a causal relationship with pizza. Maya. Lucas oversimplifies as usual. In psychology, we look for a causal link between behavior and environment. A clear relationship emerges when factors are closely associated with each other, like stress and procrastination. Ethan, from a data standpoint, you need evidence. If two variables are closely connected to or closely tied to each other, you can model a causal relation. But correlation alone doesn't prove causation. Marcus, in business, though, associated factors like market demand and supply are closely linked to profit. If you ignore them, you miss the central point of economics. Chloe, which is why Gen Z laughs at lectures. Professors talk about theories being closely allied to classical models, but in reality, memes are clearly related to culture. And they spread faster in close proximity like in group chats. Lucas, exactly. A meme can create a close relationship between strangers. It might even closely resemble academic discourse, except with more cats. Maya. But don't forget, not all connections are healthy. Some are adversely affecting development. That's why we need careful analysis to separate meaningful ties from noise. Ethan, and that's the central importance of data, proving which links are valid. Marcus, or profitable. Chloe, or viral. That's my alternative view. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're building a close contact network or just sharing memes, remember, connections are everything even if they're powered by pizza. Episode 12. Awareness, Time, and the Blur of Student Life. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about awareness and time. Personally, I only become acutely aware of deadlines when they're already passed. Maya, that's classic procrastination. In psychology, awareness often becomes apparent only under stress. Patterns of avoidance become evident when students ignore tasks until the last brief period before exams. Ethan, data supports that. Productivity spikes during a brief time window right before deadlines. It's when the causal link between panic and output becomes obvious. But the quality? Not great. Marcus, in business, you can't afford that. Companies hold an annual meeting to plan ahead. They publish an annual report and an annual review to track progress. If you wait until the last minute, the annual rate of failure skyrockets. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows awareness can become blurred. Between memes, group chats, and doom scrolling, priorities become visible only when someone posts "exam tomorrow" on Instagram. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts help me clearly understand my own chaos. We give a brief history of our failures, add sarcasm, and call it content. Honestly, that's more fun than an annual conference. Maya, but don't forget, awareness is key. If goals aren't clearly related to time management, they collapse. Ethan, and collapse is measurable. The data is clearly evident in GPA drops. Marcus, which is why businesses allocate time like they allocate resources. No memes, just calendars. Chloe, boring. I'll stick to memes. They're my alternative form of awareness. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're acutely aware or blissfully clueless, remember, time always wins. Episode 13. Behavior, Change, and the Common Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about behavior and change. Personally, I think my procrastination is an appropriate form of rebellion. Maya, Lucas, that's not rebellion. In psychology, acceptable behavior is defined by context. What might be an appropriate action in one setting could cause consequences in another. That's the central issue of social norms. Ethan, from a data perspective, stress patterns are measurable. Deadlines cause stress, and the central problem is that students don't have appropriate skills to cope. The numbers show a beneficial effect when people adopt an appropriate way of managing time. Marcus, in business, though, the central concern is efficiency. You need to allocate resources at the appropriate level. If you don't, you face additional cost. Companies reach broad agreement on strategies because they can't afford chaos. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows attitudes change constantly. What was once commonly accepted as success is now commonly associated with burnout. The changing needs of students mean memes are an appropriate response to stress. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us apply equally across topics. We give a brief history of our failures, add sarcasm, and call it content. That's the central role of humor in a changing world. Maya, but don't forget, the central assumptions behind behavior are shifting. The changing nature of society means what's appropriate language today might be offensive tomorrow. Ethan, and that's why we need careful analysis. Patterns change rapidly, and only data reveals the central characteristics of adaptation. Marcus, still, the common goal in business is profit. Everything else is a common feature of survival. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative view. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're facing changing circumstances or just trying to clearly understand chaos, remember, behavior is flexible, but stress is permanent. Episode 14. Learning Curves and Study Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about education and learning. Personally, I think my Netflix binges are an early study in human resilience. Maya, Lucas, that's not research. In psychology, we conduct a study to understand behavior. A detailed study of procrastination shows it's a developmental stage, but not a healthy one. Ethan, data agrees. Current research shows students who take a diagnostic test early can demonstrate competence in core skills. It's measurable improvement, not just anecdotal evidence. Marcus, from a business perspective, education is investment. Companies look at earlier research and earlier work to decide training programs. If employees don't demonstrate competence, they lose career opportunities. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows education is evolving. What was once an earlier study in textbooks is now memes on TikTok. Honestly, memes become the focus of learning communities. It's chaotic but effective. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts are our appropriate form of study. We give an earlier discussion of failures, add sarcasm, and call it content. That's basically an appropriate way to learn. Maya, but don't forget, the central aspect of education is growth. Without appropriate conditions, students can't thrive. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When learning environments are carefully controlled, outcomes become evident. That's the central concern of pedagogy. Marcus, still, the common goal in business and education is competence. Everything else is just noise. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative interpretation. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in an earlier study or just trying to survive finals, remember, chaos is the best teacher. Episode 15. Research, Evidence, and the Student Survey Circus. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about research. Personally, I think my group project was a comparative study of who could procrastinate the longest. Maya, Lucas, that's not science. In psychology, we conduct research with rigor. A detailed analysis or detailed examination of behavior requires descriptive statistics, not memes. You need to describe a method and describe a procedure clearly. Ethan, exactly. In computer science, we rely on data gathering and a clean data set. Without identifying the dependent variable, you can't conduct an analysis that's valid. And yes, memes don't count as documentary evidence. Marcus, from a business perspective though, you sometimes just need convincing evidence or compelling evidence to persuade investors. They don't care if it's a comparative analysis or comparative research, they want results. That's why companies develop a method or develop a technique that works fast. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows earlier memes are basically earlier work. They closely resemble surveys. Honestly, when we conduct a survey on Instagram, it's an appropriate form of research. It's chaotic but effective. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us describe a process of chaos, add sarcasm, and call it science. That's basically how we develop a theory of procrastination. Maya, but don't forget, considerable evidence comes from considerable research, not jokes. That's the central concern of academia. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you conduct an interview or conduct a survey properly, the outcomes become evident. That's the central role of methodology. Marcus, still, the common goal in business and research is persuasion. Everything else is just noise. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative interpretation. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a comparative study or just trying to survive finals, remember, chaos is the best dataset. Episode 16. Arguments, Reviews, and the Art of Chaos Writing. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about writing and arguments. Personally, I think my last paper was a comprehensive overview of why I hate mornings. Maya, Lucas, that's not scholarship. In psychology, we need a comprehensive account of behavior, not sarcasm. A critical introduction sets the stage, followed by critical writing that can develop an argument logically. Ethan, exactly. Data demands clarity. You can't just cover a topic vaguely. You need compelling evidence and a correct interpretation of the dataset. Otherwise, your analysis collapses. Marcus, in business, though, persuasion matters. A compelling argument with convincing evidence can secure funding. Investors don't want a comprehensive review of theory, they want results. That's why we draw attention to profit margins. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes can convey information, convey meaning, and even convey a message faster than a critical essay. Honestly, TikTok is a commonly used platform for education now. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss a topic, discuss an issue, and then throw in jokes. We can draw a distinction between chaos and brilliance and still sound smart. Maya, but don't forget, a comprehensive review of literature is essential. Without considerable evidence, you can't draw a conclusion that's valid. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you conduct an analysis properly, the outcomes become evident. That's the central role of methodology. Marcus, still, the central concern in business writing is persuasion. Everything else is just filler. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative view. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a critical review or just trying to survive finals, remember, chaos is the most compelling argument of all. Episode 17. Critical Thinking and the Crucial Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about critical thinking. Personally, I think the conventional wisdom is that procrastination is bad, but my critical reflection says it's just a lifestyle. Maya, Lucas, that's not reflection, that's denial. In psychology, we use a conceptual framework to consider the role of cognition. A critical approach requires us to critically evaluate behavior, not excuse it. Ethan, exactly. Data shows a crucial difference between correlation and causation. A critical examination of variables reveals the crucial factor driving outcomes. Without critical scrutiny, you risk misinterpretation. Marcus, in business, though, persuasion matters. A compelling reason or a compelling argument can secure funding. Investors don't want a comprehensive account of theory, they want results. That's why we develop an argument around profit margins. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes can convey meaning faster than a critical essay. Honestly, memes are a common culture tool. They're closely tied to identity and commonly accepted as valid discourse now. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss a topic, consider an issue, and then throw in jokes. We can draw a distinction between chaos and brilliance and still sound smart. That's the crucial point of our show. Maya, but don't forget, the core issue is growth. A critical theory lens shows the crucial importance of questioning assumptions. Without critical inquiry, you can't draw a conclusion that's valid. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you consider the impact of memes on communication, the crucial question becomes, are they data or distraction? Marcus, still, the core value in business is profit. Everything else is just noise. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative interpretation. Lucas, closing, and those are our concluding remarks. Whether you're stuck in a critical review or just trying to survive finals, remember, chaos is the most compelling argument of all. Episode 18. Data, Goals, and the Dominant Role of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about information, goals, and responsibility. Personally, I think my phone contains more digital information about me than my professors ever will. Maya, Lucas, that's the problem. In psychology, we need detailed information to design a coping strategy. Without appropriate conditions, students can't reach a desired outcome in their developmental stage. Ethan, exactly. From a data perspective, you can't just contain information without structure. You need a comprehensive approach to conduct an analysis. Only then can you create conditions for valid results. Marcus, in business, though, the central concern is efficiency. Companies invest considerable effort and make a concerted effort to complete a task. That's how they create opportunities, or at least create an opportunity for profit. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows responsibility is messy. In group projects, someone's always directly responsible for failure, while others claim a direct role in success. Honestly, I'd rather be directly involved in memes than in conflict resolution. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us convey information and convey meaning without stress. We can develop an approach, develop a strategy, and still sound smart. That's the dominant role of humor and chaos. Maya, but don't forget, considerable attention must be paid to mental health. Without it, stress causes consequences that undermine learning. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you disclose information transparently, outcomes become evident. That's the central importance of data integrity. Marcus, still, the common goal in business and education is results. Everything else is just noise. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative view. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing a desired outcome or dodging responsibility, remember, chaos is the most comprehensive approach of all. Episode 19. Problems, Markets, and the Economics of Stress. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about problems and economics. Personally, I think my biggest complex problem is deciding whether ramen counts as an economic activity. Maya, Lucas, that's trivial. In psychology, stress is a contemporary issue. When students don't deal with an issue properly, it can create problems that escalate. That's the central concern of mental health. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, Finals are a complex issue with multiple conflicting interests: grades, sleep, and social life. A critical analysis shows that poor coping can cause consequences measurable in GPA drops. Marcus, in business, the competitive market is brutal. Companies face competitive pressure daily. If you don't adapt to economic change or shifting economic conditions, you risk an economic crisis. That's why firms invest in economic analysis to predict economic consequences. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows disposable stress is worse than disposable income. The economic context of student life is memes. Honestly, memes are the only economic benefits we get from chaos. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can draw attention to the central problem of student debt while laughing about ramen. Maya, but don't forget, every controversial issue like tuition hikes needs conflict resolution. Without it, students come into conflict with institutions, and that undermines trust. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you correct an error in policy, outcomes become evident. That's the crucial importance of data-driven reform. Marcus, still, the core value in business is profit. Everything else is just noise. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative interpretation. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a complex problem or facing competitive pressure, remember, chaos is the only stable currency. Episode 20. Tech, Science, and the Democratic Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about tech, science, and society. Personally, I think the current technology that matters most is my coffee machine. It's the only thing keeping me alive. Maya, Lucas, that's not analysis. In psychology, we look at the developmental process of adaptation. In a contemporary society, people rely on digital media to cope, but it also reshapes identity. Ethan, from a data perspective, digital technology drives a dynamic process. Social networks are basically a dynamic system where memes and algorithms reach a dynamic equilibrium, chaotic but measurable. Marcus, in business, though, the economic context matters. Companies invest in current technology because it creates economic benefits. But they also face competitive pressure in the domestic market. That's why they need strategy. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows politics is messy. A democratic society depends on memes as much as on votes. Honestly, memes are the new democratic process. They convey a message faster than speeches. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can draw a distinction between chaos and order and call it analysis. That's the central role of humor and democracy. Maya, but don't forget, democratic institutions rely on due process. Without it, trust collapses. That's the crucial importance of governance. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you consider the impact of tech on politics, the crucial question becomes, are we informed citizens or just distracted consumers? Marcus, still, the core value in business and politics is survival. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative interpretation. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a dynamic system or debating democratic state politics, remember, chaos is the only constant equilibrium. Episode 21. Culture, Diversity, and the Dominant Meme. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about culture and society. Personally, I think the dominant discourse of contemporary life is memes. Forget textbooks, memes are the cultural practice we all share. Maya, Lucas, that's oversimplification. In psychology, cultural attitudes and cultural values shape identity. A critical analysis shows that cultural background and cultural factors influence behavior across diverse groups. Ethan, from a data perspective, demographic characteristics and demographic factors explain patterns. A densely populated city shows faster cultural change. The current climate of digital media accelerates this dynamic process. Marcus, in business, though, the dominant culture drives consumption. Companies exploit cultural significance and cultural influence to sell products. They rely on cultural institutions and economic activity to monetize cultural heritage and cultural tradition. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows the contemporary world is chaotic. We live in cultural diversity, crossing cultural boundaries daily. Memes are culturally specific, yet they spread globally. That's the crucial difference between old-school cultural theory and our reality. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can draw a distinction between cultural identity and branding and call it content. Maya, but don't forget, cultural context matters. Without it, you risk incorrect interpretation of cultural history and cultural life. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. Demographic change is measurable, and it directly affects how cultural phenomena become widespread. Marcus, still, the dominant ideology in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating cultural differences or just trying to survive daily living, remember, chaos is the most dominant culture of all. Episode 22. Deep Connections and Defining Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about connections and awareness. Personally, I think my complex relationship with coffee is the defining characteristic of my student identity. Maya, Lucas, that's not identity, that's dependency. In psychology, contextual factors shape how people form complex interactions. A deep understanding of these processes requires a critical approach at a deeper level. Ethan, from a data perspective, connections are measurable. A direct link or direct relationship between variables must be directly proportional to outcomes. If stress is directly related to procrastination, then memes are directly relevant to coping. Marcus, in business, though, the dominant role is profit. Companies look at direct contact with consumers, and every directly connected metric matters. That's why they develop a strategy to exploit cultural factors and maximize returns. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows awareness is deeply embedded in memes. They're deeply rooted in our cultural identity. Memes are a defining concept of our generation, an easily identified and easily understood language that crosses cultural boundaries. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, draw a distinction, and still sound smart. We can convey meaning at a deeper level, even if it's just sarcasm. Maya, but don't forget, the defining feature of awareness is reflection. Without it, connections collapse into noise. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When relationships are directly linked to outcomes, the crucial importance of awareness becomes measurable. Marcus, still, the core issue in business is survival. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating a complex interaction or chasing a deep understanding of chaos, remember, memes are the most direct link we've got. Episode 23. Time, Scale, and the Dramatic Chaos of Student Life. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about time and scale. Personally, I think the continued existence of my procrastination is the current issue professors should study. Maya, Lucas, that's avoidance. In psychology, behavior is a continuous process. During an earlier stage of development, procrastination might be adaptive, but in earlier times, it was a survival tactic. Now, it's just stress. Ethan, from a data perspective, finals show a consistent pattern. Stress rises at a constant rate, then spikes into a dramatic increase right before deadlines. The dramatic effect is measurable in GPA drops. That's not anecdotal, it's statistics. Marcus, in business, though, the current trend is efficiency. Companies invest a considerable amount of resources to ensure consistent results. They cover a range of strategies, from innovation to marketing, because the considerable importance of adaptation is survival. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the current policy of coping. They cover an area of humor that textbooks can't. Honestly, memes spark considerable interest and even considerable debate about what counts as education. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. We can draw attention to the dramatic change in student culture and still sound smart. Maya, but don't forget, the earlier period of education relied on lectures. Now, the considerable influence of digital media reshapes learning. That's the considerable extent of cultural shift. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. A diverse range of coping strategies leads to considerable variation in outcomes. That's the crucial factor in adaptation. Marcus, still, the core issue in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in an earlier version of study habits or chasing continued growth, remember, chaos is the most consistent result of all. Episode 24. Complex Systems and the Creative Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about complexity and creativity. Personally, I think my complex situation with deadlines is the dominant form of chaos in my life. Maya, Lucas, that's not chaos, that's avoidance. In psychology, behavior is a complex process influenced by constituent elements like motivation and environment. A critical analysis shows that stress is a critical issue with critical importance for mental health. Ethan, from a data perspective, finals show a complex pattern. Stress rises at a constant rate, then spikes into a dramatic increase. The direct consequences are measurable in GPA drops. That's why we need direct observation and direct communication to track outcomes. Marcus, in business, though, the driving force is efficiency. Companies contribute significantly to innovation when they create an environment for creative work. A comprehensive system ensures consistent results. That's the crucial role of management. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant paradigm. They're a creative process and a distinguishing feature of our cultural identity. Memes are easily accessible, they create an impression, and they're the crucial part of our daily coping. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us cover a range of topics, draw a distinction between chaos and brilliance, and still sound smart. That's the critical role of humor in a complex system. Maya, but don't forget, awareness is deeply embedded in reflection. Without critical attention, connections collapse into noise. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When outcomes are directly proportional to effort, the crucial point becomes clear: memes are data. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a complex area or chasing creative thinking, remember, chaos is the most comprehensive system of all. Episode 25. Education, Opportunity, and the Experiential Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about education. Personally, I think the most important educational opportunity I've had was learning how to nap between classes. Maya, Lucas oversimplifies as usual. In psychology, the educational setting matters. A supportive environment can enhance learning and foster experiential learning, which is critical for development. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, the educational system is a complex structure. Educational research shows that students with access to employment opportunities after graduation perform better academically. That's a direct link between motivation and outcomes. Marcus, in business, the educational provision is an investment. Companies rely on educational programs to train employees. Without the right educational qualifications, you can't compete in a competitive market. That's the critical importance of education in economic activity. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows the current policy of education is outdated. The contemporary issue is that memes teach faster than lectures. Honestly, memes are the most effective creative process for students. They're easily understood and easily identified as part of our cultural phenomenon. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can create an impression of being intellectual while joking about ramen. That's the dominant form of student learning. Maya, but don't forget, The educational institution plays a crucial role in shaping identity. Without reform, the educational context risks becoming irrelevant. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When policies are deemed necessary, they contribute significantly to outcomes. That's the critical factor in reform. Marcus, still, the core value in business and education is survival. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing educational opportunities or just trying to survive finals, remember, chaos is the most experiential learning of all. Episode 26. Empirical Chaos and Experimental Life. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about research. Personally, I think my group project was an empirical study of who could procrastinate the longest. Maya, Lucas, that's not science. In psychology, we rely on empirical evidence and empirical support to validate theories. A proper empirical investigation requires structure, not sarcasm. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you need to gather data systematically. Whether it's existing data or experimental data, you must employ a method and employ a technique that ensures consistent results. Otherwise, your analysis collapses. Marcus, in business, the critical factor is application. Companies use experimental design to test products under experimental conditions. They rely on experimental results and experimental evidence to decide whether to invest. That's why they fund extensive research. It's the crucial role of innovation. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are basically field research. They're experimental work in cultural identity. Honestly, memes are an empirical work of our generation, easily identified and easily understood as data points in a cultural phenomenon. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can extract data from chaos, add sarcasm, and call it science. That's the creative process of student research. Maya, but don't forget, further analysis and further investigation are always needed. Without further evidence, you can't draw a conclusion that's valid. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. Future research and future studies will show whether memes are coping strategies or just distractions. Marcus, still, the dominant paradigm in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in an experimental study or chasing future research, remember, chaos is the most empirical data of all. Episode 27. Drafts, Definitions, and the Final Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about academic writing. Personally, I think my first draft is always the final version because I never bother editing. Maya, Lucas, that's not writing, that's negligence. In psychology, a full analysis requires revision. A general definition of academic work is that it's iterative. You need a final section and concluding probability that reflect a deeper level of thought. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you can't skip steps. You need existing research, further information, and sometimes a fuller discussion to reach a general conclusion. Without further analysis, your results collapse. Marcus, in business, the critical factor is presentation. Investors want a polished final answer, not a messy first author draft. That's why companies fund extensive research and demand a general overview that's concise but persuasive. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows the electronic version is all that matters. Professors don't read the final chapter anyway. Memes are a creative work. They create an impression faster than a general statement in a paper. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us discuss an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it scholarship. Maya, but don't forget, every academic writing process needs further explanation. Without it, your general argument is shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When drafts are directly proportional to effort, the critical importance of revision becomes measurable. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business writing is clarity. Everything else is noise. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in a first draft or chasing a final analysis, remember, chaos is the most general conclusion of all. Episode 28. Fundamental Questions and General Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about thinking and analysis. Personally, I think the fundamental problem of student life is deciding whether ramen counts as a general category of nutrition. Maya, Lucas, that's not analysis, that's denial. In psychology, we examine the role of cognition in behavior. A fundamental aspect of learning is reflection. Without it, you can't reach a deep understanding of yourself. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you need a general formula. Stress is directly proportional to deadlines. That's a fundamental difference between preparation and procrastination. The explanatory power of data lies in consistent results. Marcus, in business, the fundamental importance is profit. Companies focus attention on efficiency, and they explore further strategies to adapt. A flexible approach is the critical factor in survival. That's why firms rely on expert opinion and general theory to guide decisions. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes fall into the category of coping strategies. They're deeply rooted in our culture, easily understood, and they create an impression faster than any general statement. Honestly, memes are the dominant form of analysis now. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus on an aspect, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it scholarship. Maya, but don't forget, every fundamental question needs context. Without contextual factors, your general approach risks being shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. A general tendency emerges: stress spikes before exams. That's generally accepted, and we can generally agree it's chaos. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is clarity. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing a fundamental principle or debating a general argument, remember, chaos is the most general consensus of all. Episode 29. Information, Methods, and the Flexible Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about information and methods. Personally, I think the most essential information for students is knowing which vending machine still has ramen. Maya, Lucas, that's trivial. In psychology, students need to gain information about themselves. A flexible approach to learning, like experiential learning, helps them adapt. But they must also follow instructions in structured tasks. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you can't just rely on memes. You need factual information and electronic resources. Researchers gather information, extract information, and find information systematically. Only then can you reach a full analysis. Marcus, in business, the effective method is efficiency. Companies employ a method or employ a technique to train employees. They create an environment where general approaches are tested, but the critical factor is results. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant form of communication. They're easily accessible, they create an impression, and they're easily understood faster than lectures. Honestly, memes are our creative work, they're the general statement of our generation. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus on an aspect, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it scholarship. Maya, but don't forget, every educational institution relies on further information to refine learning. Without it, the fundamental importance of education collapses. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When you follow a procedure and follow a format, outcomes are generally accepted as valid. That's the general consensus in research. Marcus, still, the core issue in business is survival. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck trying to find information or chasing an effective method, remember, chaos is the most flexible approach of all. Episode 30. Goals, Roles, and the Final Outcome of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about goals and roles. Personally, I think my economic goal is just surviving on ramen until payday. Maya, Lucas, that's not a goal, that's desperation. In psychology, the essential role of goals is motivation. Students need to engage in an activity that helps them reach their full potential. Without that, the final outcome is burnout. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you need structure. Effective participation in group projects leads to consistent results. If everyone fulfills an obligation and follows instructions, the final outcome is measurable success. That's the critical importance of teamwork. Marcus, in business, the first priority is efficiency. Companies rely on effective management and effective implementation of strategy. They encourage the development of skills and facilitate the development of systems. That's the crucial role of leadership. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant form of participation. They create an impression, they're easily accessible, and they focus attention on what matters, like procrastination. Honestly, memes are our creative work and the general statement of our generation. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it achievement. Maya, but don't forget, the fundamental aspect of goals is growth. Without it, the general consensus is that students stagnate. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. When roles are directly linked to outcomes, the crucial factor becomes clear. Memes are data. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing an economic goal or trying to reach your full potential, remember, chaos is the most effective participation of all. Episode 31. Problems, Finance, and the Economic Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about problems and finance. Personally, I think the biggest financial problem for students is deciding whether to spend their last foreign currency on coffee or ramen. Maya, Lucas, that's not finance, that's survival. In psychology, students often encounter difficulties when balancing stress and money. An ethical dilemma arises when they choose between health and grades. That's the fundamental problem of student life. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, students experience problems in a consistent pattern. Stress is directly proportional to debt. The economic factors include tuition, housing, and food. Without further analysis, you can't measure the economic consequences. Marcus, in business, the first priority is profit. Companies exploit economic interests and economic resources to achieve economic growth. But they also face economic inequality and economic instability. That's why effective management and economic reform are essential for economic success. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant paradigm of coping. They help us face a challenge, face a dilemma, and even face a problem with humor. Honestly, memes are our economic value. They're free, they're easily accessible, and they create an impression faster than lectures. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, cover a topic, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it economics. Maya, but don't forget, every ethical issue needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is that students remain stuck in cycles of stress. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. Economic forces and economic relationships shape the economic structure. That's the critical importance of data-driven reform. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're stuck in an ethical problem or chasing economic prosperity, remember, chaos is the most economic system of all. Episode 32. Digital Voices, Scientific Evolution, and Social Identity. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about tech, science, and society. Personally, I think the most important electronic media for students is memes. They're the effective communication tool of our generation. Maya, Lucas, that's oversimplification. In psychology, emotional intelligence is the essential role in relationships. Without it, ethnic differences and gender stereotypes become barriers. A flexible approach is needed to foster gender equality. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, electronic communication and electronic access create a consistent pattern. Information flows at a constant rate, shaping the general trend of social interaction. That's the critical importance of tech in a dynamic system. Marcus, in business, the driving force is policy. Companies depend on effective policy from the federal government and federal agencies. They adapt to foreign policy shifts and economic forces. That's the crucial role of governance in economic growth. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows identity is messy. An ethnic community or ethnic group defines belonging, but memes cut across ethnic diversity. They're culturally specific, yet easily understood globally. Honestly, memes are the dominant form of our cultural phenomenon. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on identity, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, face discrimination is still a critical issue. Without reform, the general consensus is that society remains divided. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. The evolutionary process shows adaptation, and evolutionary theory explains diversity. That's the fundamental principle of change. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business and politics is survival. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating ethnic identity or debating effective policy, remember, chaos is the most electronic communication of all. Episode 33. Environment, External Forces, and the Impact of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about environment and connections. Personally, I think the biggest environmental concern for students is whether the cafeteria food counts as environmental damage. Maya, Lucas, that's trivial. In psychology, environmental factors play an essential role in behavior. Stress from pollution or climate change creates environmental issues that affect mental health. Students must establish a relationship between personal choices and global impact. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, the environmental consequences are measurable. Environmental degradation and environmental pollution show a consistent pattern in the data. You can extract information from electronic resources to track environmental changes and environmental effects. Marcus, in business, the first priority is sustainability. Companies rely on environmental policy and environmental protection to maintain economic stability. But they also face external forces like regulation, external influences from public opinion, and even external threats from competitors. That's the critical importance of effective management. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant form of activism. They create an impression, they're easily accessible, and they connect us to the external world faster than lectures. Honestly, memes are our creative work, they're the general statement of our generation. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on sustainability, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it environmental analysis. Maya, but don't forget, without environmental protection, the general consensus is that society faces collapse. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. External sources of pollution directly affect outcomes. That's the crucial factor in reform. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're facing environmental impact or navigating external factors, remember, chaos is the most sustainable system of all. Episode 34. Awareness, Development, and the Final Step of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about awareness and development. Personally, I think my first impression of finals week is always panic, followed by an emotional reaction that looks suspiciously like crying. Maya, Lucas, that's avoidance. In psychology, Emotional support is an essential role in coping. Students must be fully aware of their stress, fully informed about resources, and try to fully understand their own limits. Otherwise, the final outcome is burnout. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress follows an ever-increasing curve. During the entire period of finals, it expands at a constant rate. The final result is predictable. You can track it from the first phase to the final stage using factual information and experimental data. Marcus, in business, the first priority is growth. Companies expand rapidly during an extended period of success, but they must prepare for future development and future prospects. That's the critical importance of effective management and final decisions. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant form of coping. They capture the emotional impact, they're easily understood, and they create an impression faster than lectures. Honestly, memes are our creative work, they're the final product of chaos. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on identity, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into stress, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every final point in development needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is that students remain stuck. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. From first contact with deadlines to the final step of submission, the ever-changing data shows stress is inevitable. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating an emotional response or chasing future prospects, remember, chaos is the most final stage of all. Episode 35. Scale, Equality, and the Enormous Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about scale and equality. Personally, I think the enormous amount of ramen I eat has an enormous impact on my GPA. It's the fundamentally different kind of nutrition. Maya, Lucas, that's not nutrition, that's denial. In psychology, equal treatment and fair treatment are equally important for mental health. Students must be fully developed emotionally to reach their full potential. Otherwise, the final outcome is burnout. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress is extremely complex. It's frequently found across demographics, frequently cited in research, and frequently referred to in policy. The entire range of coping strategies shows consistent results. Some are fairly common, others are fairly straightforward, but all are measurable. Marcus, in business, the first priority is efficiency. Companies rely on equal access and equal opportunity to expand markets. They need effective management to ensure full employment and economic growth. That's why firmly established systems and extremely valuable resources matter. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant form of equality. They're freely available, they allow free access and free movement across cultures, and they're extremely useful for coping. Honestly, memes are our general feature, they're equally valid, equally true, and fairly obvious as the final product of chaos. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on identity, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into stress, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every exceptional case or exceptional circumstance needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is that students remain stuck. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. A finite number of coping strategies are equally likely to succeed. That's the critical importance of adaptation. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating equal status or chasing an enormous impact, remember, chaos is the most fully realized system of all. Episode 36. Principles, Ethics, and Established Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about principles and ethics. Personally, I think the most essential feature of my study routine is procrastination. It's the established practice I can't escape. Maya, Lucas, that's not a feature, that's avoidance. In psychology, every essential component of learning has an essential function. Reflection is the focal point of growth. Without it, you can't answer an ethical question or respect an ethical principle. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress is tied to existing structures. You need a formal structure with functional requirements to measure outcomes. Only then can you provide further consideration and further development of coping strategies. Marcus, in business, the established order is efficiency. Companies rely on established principles to survive. They must weigh ethical considerations when making decisions, but the critical importance is profit. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the dominant form of ethics. They're easily accessible, they create an impression, and they're frequently used to critique power. Honestly, memes are our essential element. They're entirely different from lectures, but they're the fully realized voice of our generation. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on identity, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add sarcasm, and call it philosophy. Maya, but don't forget, every ethical consideration needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is that society remains stuck. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. Categories are further divided into measurable outcomes. That's the crucial factor in reform. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating an ethical principle or chasing an essential function, remember, chaos is the most established order of all. Episode 37. Feedback, Evidence, and the Heated Debate of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about feedback and debates. Personally, I think professors should just give feedback in meme form. It's faster, funnier, and way more viral. Maya, Lucas, that's not pedagogy, that's chaos. In psychology, mentors must give guidance to help students reach their high score in learning outcomes. Without structured reflection, you can't give consideration to the deeper processes of cognition. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, you need to give evidence. A graphical representation of stress levels shows a high correlation between procrastination and GPA drops. That's generally assumed in research, but the great accuracy of the data makes it hardly surprising. Marcus, in business, the focal point is clarity. Leaders must give an overview of the market, give information to stakeholders, and give emphasis to risks. That's the guiding principle of effective management. Without it, you can't survive competition. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the global context of communication. They give an explanation faster than lectures, they're generally considered cultural shorthand, and they give insight into identity. Honestly, memes are the general perspective of our generation. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, give an indication of trends, and still sound smart. We can gain information, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every heated debate needs further explanation. Without it, the general consensus is shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. Ideas are generally found across datasets, generally known by scholars, and generally accepted as valid. That's the critical importance of evidence. Marcus, still, the established principle in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing a high score or stuck in a heated debate, remember, chaos is the most generally accepted conclusion of all. Episode 38. Global Shifts, Growing Trends, and the Strategy of Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about global shifts and strategies. Personally, I think students should just give information in meme form. It's faster, funnier, and way more viral than lectures. Maya, Lucas, that's not pedagogy, that's chaos. In psychology, mentors must give priority to emotional well-being. With growing awareness of mental health, students can greatly enhance their resilience. Without it, the final outcome is burnout. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress is greatly influenced by external forces. During a given period, you can track how it greatly increases before exams and is greatly reduced after. That's a growing trend in the dataset, and it's hardly surprising given the high correlation between deadlines and anxiety. Marcus, in business, the global market and global trade are the focal points. Companies must have a strategy to survive global capitalism. They rely on government policy, government intervention, and even government expenditure to stabilize the global economy. Without effective management, you face high turnover and high unemployment. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the global culture. They spread through the global media and global networks, connecting us in a global village. Honestly, memes are our essential element. They're freely available, heavily influenced by identity, and they give insight into who we are. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, give an overview of trends, and still sound smart. We can gain information, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every ethical consideration needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. Companies grow rapidly in certain geographical areas, shaped by geographical distribution and geographical location. That's the critical importance of context. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing future prospects or navigating a global shift, remember, chaos is the most firmly established strategy of all. Episode 39. High expectations, global issues, and the hierarchy of chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about scale and structure. Personally, I think the great majority of my energy goes into procrastination, which has a high probability of tanking my GPA. Maya, Lucas, that's not strategy, that's avoidance. In psychology, high expectations are an essential component of motivation. Students must be fully aware of the high intensity of stress and the great impact it has on their emotional responses. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress shows a high incidence during exams. A graphical representation reveals a high correlation between caffeine intake and productivity. That's generally assumed, but the great significance of the data makes it hardly surprising. Marcus, in business, the high priority is efficiency. Companies give access to resources, maintain high standards, and chase high-value markets. But the global issue is sustainability. Without a hierarchical structure and global structure, you face high turnover and unstable growth. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the focal point of culture. They give somebody an impression instantly, they're freely available, and they reflect great diversity. Honestly, memes are our high-profile activism. They're greatly influenced by identity and heavily influenced by global media. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, give somebody treatment in the form of sarcasm, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into chaos, add humor, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every high level of awareness needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. A high percentage of coping strategies are equally valid. That's the critical importance of adaptation. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing greater autonomy or navigating a global issue, remember, chaos is the most firmly established hierarchy of all. Episode 40. Flexibility, frequency, and the high-order chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about flexibility and emphasis. Personally, I think the greater flexibility of memes makes them the high-priority coping mechanism for students. They're the high concentration of humor in an otherwise boring academic life. Maya, Lucas, that's not coping, that's avoidance. In psychology, we place greater emphasis on reflection. Students must be fully aware of the high intensity of stress and the high incidence of burnout. Without that, the final outcome is predictable. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress shows a higher frequency during exams. A graphical representation reveals a high level of anxiety, with a high probability of failure if students don't adapt. That's generally found in datasets, and it's hardly surprising given the high correlation between deadlines and panic. Marcus, in business, the high order of priorities is efficiency. Companies chase high-value markets, maintain high standards, and rely on firmly established systems. But the global issue is sustainability. Without effective management, you face high turnover and high unemployment. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the high-profile activism of our time. They give somebody an impression instantly, they're freely available, and they reflect great diversity. Honestly, memes are our general statement they're equally valid, equally true, and fairly obvious as the final product of chaos. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on identity, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into stress, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every high status of awareness needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. A high proportion of coping strategies are equally likely to succeed. That's the critical importance of adaptation. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're chasing greater autonomy or navigating a high order of priorities, remember, chaos is the most firmly established hierarchy of all. Episode 41. Access, Consequences, and the High-Status Chaos. Lucas, host, welcome back. Today's episode is about scale and consequences. Personally, I think the great proportion of my energy goes into procrastination, which has high consequences for my GPA. But hey, memes still give somebody an impression that I'm thriving. Maya, Lucas, that's not thriving, that's denial. In psychology, we place greater emphasis on reflection. Students must be fully aware of the high intensity of stress and the high incidence of burnout. Without that, the final outcome is predictable. Ethan, from a data perspective, though, stress shows a higher frequency during exams. A graphical representation reveals a high concentration of anxiety, with a high probability of failure if students don't adapt. That's generally considered a high-level risk, and it's hardly surprising given the high correlation between deadlines and panic. Marcus, in business, the high priority is efficiency. Companies give access to resources, maintain high standards, and chase high-value markets. But the global structure is fragile. Without a hierarchical structure, you face high turnover and unstable growth. Chloe, yeah, but Gen Z knows memes are the high-profile activism of our time. They're freely available, they reflect great diversity, and they're heavily influenced by global media. Honestly, memes are our essential feature they're equally valid, equally true, and fairly obvious as the final product of chaos. Lucas, exactly. Podcasts let us explore an issue, focus attention on identity, and still sound smart. We can gain insight into stress, add sarcasm, and call it analysis. Maya, but don't forget, every greater autonomy of awareness needs reflection. Without it, the general consensus is shallow. Ethan, and the numbers prove it. A high proportion of coping strategies are equally likely to succeed. That's the critical importance of adaptation. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our episode. Whether you're navigating a global issue or chasing high status, remember, chaos is the most firmly established hierarchy of all. Episode 42. Recap and Greatest Hits, the Chaos Season. Lucas, host, welcome back to our Greatest Hits episode. Season 3 was basically me trying to give information in meme form while Maya kept reminding me that procrastination is not an essential feature of learning. Maya, exactly. I spent half the season telling you to give priority to mental health, and the other half explaining why memes can't be an effective treatment for stress. But hey, at least we had some heated debates. Ethan, and I kept demanding data. Remember when I showed a graphical representation of caffeine intake versus GPA? The high correlation was hardly surprising. Honestly, the great significance of memes in your life is statistically tragic. Marcus, meanwhile, I was stuck reminding everyone that the global marketplace doesn't run on sarcasm. Companies need government policy, government intervention, and a hierarchical structure. But Lucas kept saying chaos is a business model. Chloe, because it is. Gen Z knows memes are the global culture. They're freely available, they give somebody an impression instantly, and they're greatly influenced by identity. Honestly, memes were the high-profile activism of our season. Lucas, true. And let's not forget the time Ethan dropped genetic variation explains diversity, like he was narrating a biology documentary. Or when Maya insisted on greater equality while I was busy chasing ramen. Maya, because ramen was your high priority. Ethan, and your high probability of failure. Marcus, still, the dominant position in business is profit. Everything else is branding. Chloe, or memes. That's my alternative perspective. Lucas, closing, and that's our recap. Whether you love the global shifts, the heated debates, or just Chloe roasting me, Season 3 proved one thing: chaos is the most firmly established hierarchy of all.